Hello and welcome. This time of year, lots of people are thinking about camp. And so we thought it would be a good idea to share some successful camp experiences that are beyond diabetes camp. Diabetes camp is great. I've done plenty of episodes on diabetes camp. I love it. I think every kiddo with diabetes should have the chance to go. And there's some adult camp programs out there if you are an adult with type 1 and didn't get the chance. But we're going to talk about something a little different this time around. And that is what I call what I call regular sleepaway camp. I can't even say regular sleepaway camp. I almost snuck diabetes in there. And that is just your general residential camp where there is probably a medical staff or a nurse, but the kids go away for a week, 2 weeks, a month, a whole summer. And it is not focused around diabetes. And that takes some getting used to and some special preparation. So I'm really excited to welcome in a couple of people to help me out. So I am really pleased to welcome Shelby Hughes and April Blackwell. We are going to talk about camp. Ladies, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us. Thanks.
Absolutely. You got it. Hey, before we start, let me just ask you to say a little bit about yourself and your connection to type 1 diabetes, what you're up to these days. Shelby, let me start with you. Tell us a little bit about you.
My name is Shelby Hughes. I am a mom of a type 1 diabetic, and I'm also type 1 myself. My daughter, Caroline, is 11. She was diagnosed when she was 7 years old, and we live in Northeast North Carolina.
Nice. All right. April, you are probably familiar to many of our listeners, but tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, my name is April Blackwell. I have type 1 myself. It's been a couple decades now, I guess. And I currently live in Houston, Texas, where I have my dream job. I get to fly the International Space Station from Mission Control.
That's amazing. I love it. And I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here. We'll get to your camp experience, but it may not shock you that April will be talking about space camp.
Big surprise.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And I, of course, I am the host of the show. My son was diagnosed right before he turned 2. He is now 16, and he started going to sleepaway camp when he was 8 years old. So we'll talk about that more in depth, because I think we are all in agreement here that camp is cool. Camp is great. Camp is really good for kids and for parents. So Shelby, tell me about your when you decided to send your child to camp, how old she was, what kind of camp it was, how long?
So the first year that Caroline went to camp was before she was diagnosed with diabetes. And I know it seems early, but the camp where my older 2 children had gone was, not a lengthy stay camp. It was about 5 nights, 6 days, and it was a church camp. But it was within, reasonable driving distance from our house. And they offered a starter camp the year that Caroline finished first grade. And it was maybe a 4-night, 5-day situation. So we sent her to that, and she had such a great experience. And so that just was on our radar. Like I just feel like camp is super important for all kids. So, we wanted to get her started as early as possible.
When she was then diagnosed with type 1, did you hesitate sending her back?
No. I think she was diagnosed in the middle of her 2nd grade year. And the only hesitation was I was worried that the camp wouldn't accommodate her and would say, no, she can't come. We can't deal with that. So that was our only issue. And when we got in touch with the camp director, and she said, no problem, we'll work it out. We were all ready to go.
Wow, that's great. All right, and we'll get into the details of what we all have to do for those accommodations, and for us as parents to be able to sleep through the night ourselves when our kids are at camp. April, tell me a little bit about your camp experience. How old were you when you went to camp, and did you have type 1 at the time already?
Yeah, so I have I guess it all goes with my nerdy persona, but I did go one summer. I did a back-to-back space camp in California when that was still open, and the next week I went to diabetes camp. So two very like different scenarios for a person with diabetes. And this was only about a year or so after my diagnosis. So I was still doing injections. I didn't have basically no technology at all, back in the dark ages, I guess. So I think in some ways that helps maybe because my parents weren't used to getting, share data all day long. And so it sort of put that independence on me to, take care and manage my diabetes on my own. And I think that was a big step for me personally, just because I wanted to be like everyone else and have sleepovers and go to camp and stuff. So it was a big motivator for me to um, take my diabetes on myself.
And I'm sorry, did you say how old you were when you went to that camp?
I think I was like around 12 or 13. So
Okay. Did you go back to diabetes camp? Did you go back to regular camp?
I never went back to those two camps actually. I did some other like church camps and stuff, but my summers just seemed to get really busy, so it was hard to fit in those other camps.
Yeah, that's a tough age once you get to be about 14. I think there's so much going on, right? It's hard. And our camp experience, which I've shared before, is that my daughter, like you, Shelby, my daughter went to this camp. My older child is 3 years older than Benny and had a great time and would come home every summer and say, I can't wait for you to go. And I'd be like, there's no way he's going. Stop. And we were very fortunate, in my opinion, because it helped me. I don't know about Benny, but he was going to diabetes camp and he was able to go when he was 7. So he went for a week to diabetes camp. And then the next summer, he went to diabetes camp for a week and then his regular camp for 2 weeks. And I say we were lucky because it got me used to the idea of him being away, understanding what needed to be done, even, and we'll get into this later, even adjusting basal rates for activity and things like that. But he went for 2 weeks when he was 8. We did not have share yet because it wasn't even around. And he just had his deck. No, did he have a Dexcom that first year? He did not have a Dexcom that first year. It was finger stick only. And then the next year he had share. He had Dexcom, no share. And that next year at age 9, he went for a month and he has gone for a month every year since, except for COVID. And this year the camp is going to Israel for a month. That's the age group
Wow.
where they go to Israel. So we are dealing with a totally different, in my opinion, environment. To him, it's the same thing, but that's a different episode. So that's our summer camp experience. And it has not been perfect, far from it, but it has been, I think, one of the seminal experiences of his childhood and has certainly influenced him in a great way and given him a lot of confidence and independence and given me a lot of sleepless nights. So, all right, Shelby, let me start with you. When your daughter was going back to camp, they were familiar with her. They knew. What were some things that you talked to them about to kind of get things, set her up for success? Was there anything that you did at the time or learned since that made it a little easier for her and for the staff?
So one of the things, they did have a full-time nurse, which was great. And the nurse was very willing to be trained on all things pump related and CGM related. And she at the time had the Medtronic 670G, which automatically adjusts her basal rate as long as she's in auto mode. So I figured that would make things a little easier, then people wouldn't have to be fooling with their pump, adjusting rates and whatnot. And also, the director got me in touch with the cafeteria staff, with the head of the dining hall. She was fantastic. She sent me a list of everything that they were going to be serving, every meal for the entire time. So that gave me the opportunity to, give them some carb counts. So they were very willing to work with me in terms of, figuring out what she was going to eat and what the carb counts were.
Cool. April, I know it was a kind of a different time. As you said, you say no technology, but you had shots and you had your meter, which is tech.
That's true.
Did anybody help you? I mean, at 12, you probably were okay, but I would always assume that there might be a little supervision or kind of over the shoulder. Are you doing all right? Do you remember how it was handled? What you did?
Yeah, so this is actually something I think is really great about Space Camp, to the point that it inspired me to become a counselor while I was in college. But they're just, a very they have everything planned out and under control as you would maybe expect a space camp to have. So we had, if you're familiar with Star Trek, we had a sick bay. That was,
I love it.
yeah, it was just part of the camp experience. And even though space camp isn't necessarily geared towards kids with health conditions, it became just a seamless part of the whole camp experience. So, you know, before every meal, the whole group would just swing by sick bay, and anyone who needed to take meds or like me, check my blood sugar, take a shot, would just go into sick bay while everyone else was playing kickball or something, you know, for a few minutes. And it was awesome because it didn't make you feel singled out at all, and it was just part of the whole camp experience. So I think that's a really great feeling as a kid. And it allows you to have that moment with the nurse or doctor to have sort of a one-on-one conversation about any sort of dosing deltas that you should incorporate for upcoming activities.
Yeah. Shelby, did your kiddo have a similar experience like that? Did they do anything?
That was kind of the same thing. There were other kids that took meds before meals, and they would kind of divert to the nurse's clinic. And she would, I don't think she would take her insulin before meals, but I think that the nurse would check her blood sugar, make sure her, you know, everything was good with their pump. And then after dinner, I think she would head by there, and the nurse would help her figure out how much to put in her pump.
Yeah. It was really reassuring to me. I remember starting to kind of plan this in January of the year he went, when he went in, you know, July or August or whenever it was, and calling the medical people and saying, how are we going to do this? You know, at 8 years old, I need eyes on him to make sure that he's changing his pump site, to make sure that his insulin cartridge is full. You know, trust but verify, you know, very independent, good kid, but still 8 years old. You know, you're not going to let him walk around camp by himself all the time doing everything. So she laughed and said, oh, that whole cabin gets medication at that age. You know, and you forget that there are other kids with issues going to camp. And what we didn't have to work it out at all, because that cabin, and not everybody, but, you know, a bunch of the kids in that cabin would get on a golf cart. This is a very large camp. Get on a golf cart and go up to the infirmary, which I'm going to suggest should be Star Trek themed as sick bay. I like that. But they would go up to the infirmary every night. And so when he was 8, that very first year, what we decided was he'd go up with them every night, and they would physically look at the pump and make sure that it was an Animus pump, so it had a battery, no charge. But they would check the battery. They would check that it had insulin at least for the night, that his pump site, you know, they kind of kept track, was changed every 3 days or whatever. And it just made me feel better that they had eyes on him, and it made them feel better as well. Something we added in for the next couple of years, as I realized that, frankly, they weren't on top of the site changes as much as I thought they would be, because they trusted Benny, who's a very wonderful kid, but isn't going to change his inside every 3 days unless somebody is reminding him. Let's face it. So what we did was, at meals at most camps, they have meds in the dining hall, because a lot of kids have to take medications with food. At least at our camp, they have a table. So I said, why don't you just bring the inset every 3 days and pretend it's like an antibiotic or an ADHD medication, like write it down. And then every 3 days, here, let's watch you change it. And he loved it, because he truly did not have to think about it at all. And that really helped. Once we started incorporating it more as a regular kind of medication thing, it made a lot more sense for everybody. And it took us, I don't want to say 3 years before we thought of that one. Let me see. One of the things that I like to think about is, I want to make it easy on the camp. And I'm curious, April, if your parents, and I know it's kind of a different time or whatever, it wasn't that long ago, did your parents talk to them ahead of time or try to figure out ways to make it easier on them, or do any education of the staff?
Yeah, definitely. I know they were in contact with the nurses group there at Space Camp before we even signed up to go to camp, to make sure it was something feasible, because you need to get your hopes up about going to camp and then, you know, have to do a detour. So that was really important. And also our endocrinologists our pediatric endo was so good with this stuff. So they had, these resource papers to be able to give to the nurses, topics to talk about while you're there checking in, how to like set up all your supplies and have backup supplies. And so I know my parents used those resources, and shared those resources with the nurses there at Space Camp.
I meant to ask, one of the things that I get asked a lot is, how does your child carry supplies around camp? I'd be curious to know, April, and again, I'll start with you. How did you do it? Obviously, different technology. Did you carry stuff everywhere you went? Did you have a central location?
So the Space Camp in California was pretty small. So we just had everything centrally located at the nurses station. When I was a counselor at Space Camp in Huntsville, Alabama, it was a bigger facility, and the part that I was actually a counselor at was a little ways away from where the nurses station was. So if we had any kids with issues that would potentially need immediate attention, we just carried like a little backpack with us and had their supplies with us all the time. Sometimes we'd be out in the woods or swimming or doing some other activities. So we just, like, every counselor carried a little backpack, and we had our own stuff, but also our camper stuff in there too.
Yeah, that's great. How about you, Shelby? Did your daughter carry stuff?
She did. She had a little, like a little sling back, backpack where she just kept water and glucose tablets. She didn't carry major things like site changes or insulin. That was all in the nurses station. But yeah, just emergency things.
Yeah. We sent Benny with a Camelback, the kind of backpack that you have water in. And that worked out well for a couple of years. Then he was like, yeah, forget it. Just taking the sling bag. He liked to have insets because the pool for a while was notorious. We did find some stuff that worked. Everybody's skin is different. And this is not an endorsement. It's not a paid endorsement, but I will endorse Stay Put medical patches. Has been the only thing that works for him. And like I said, everybody's skin is different. But for a long time, he carried insets just because the pool was such a pain for him. But also, you have to have reasonable expectations. I know you all are wonderful and your children are super responsible. But Benny they always give it like best camper or silly awards at the end in their cabin. And he got like most likely to leave your bag everywhere. They were always bringing him his bag. It was just ridiculous. But as he got older, he got better at that. And you do have to have your stuff with you. And now, I don't know, it seems like all these teenagers carry bags, diabetes or not. They always have stuff with them, even the guys. So it's not a big deal anymore as much. April, I'm interested in your experience too as a counselor. What, we didn't talk about this ahead of time, but I'll ask you anyway. What kind of things do you think set a camper up for success? And listen, when I'm talking about success, I don't mean that their blood sugar is 95 the whole time they're at camp, right? You're going to go up, you're going to go down, you're going to have wonky numbers. But I mean, like, they're able to have a good time with minimal interruptions. They're able to leave with confidence. Is there anything that kind of goes through your mind as I say those things?
Yeah, I think preparation is key, and not just logistically the supplies and the directions for the nurse, but actually practicing being away from your parents or whoever helps you manage your diabetes for some shorter period of time, and probably very dependent on the kid too. But just maybe spending the night at grandma's house or a friend's house for a night or two, and seeing how everything works and how it goes. And it's also, I think, a little preparation for the parents too, because in my experience as a counselor, even though I had diabetes, and I did have a couple campers that had diabetes as well, their parents would stay in a hotel that was close to site, even though most campers flew there to go to Space Camp, but their parents would stay in a hotel. They would check on them every night or at some time during the day. They may even give them injections or boluses. I had one who sort of like preloaded their kid before bed with a bunch of pudding, because they always went low overnight, which to me sounds like maybe we should change some other settings, but that's not my call to make. So
right.
As counselors, we need to just respect the wishes of the parents, I think is really important. And so I don't know, having that practice beforehand for both sides of it, the camper and the parents, I think is a good idea beforehand.
Yeah, man, it's got to be hard to do nothing and then go to a week or 2 weeks away. If your kid's never been out of the house, or, shouldn't say it like that. If your kid's never spent an overnight somewhere, that's a great bit of advice.
Yeah.
Shelby, any thoughts? I mean, I asked a bunch of questions there, but, kind of to set up for success, was there anything that you've learned over the years that your daughter was at this camp?
I didn't think about it, but yeah, I think having them spend the night out before you ship them off for a week or more is good. And fortunately, we had some opportunities for Caroline to have sleepovers preceding the camp experience. So that was good. And they weren't perfect, but, I think the goal is just to stay alive and we're good.
We have a similar sense of humor too, Shelby and I. So I know you have a sense of humor too, April. It's just right. I mean, you hate to be blunt, but that's what everybody's scared of,
right?
When you're sending your child off, and they are fine. They are fine. They are.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Looking at the CGM data after she came back from camp, and I was horrified to see that she was, running high throughout the night. We figured out later they were giving her like those Lara bars, which are 25 carbs, before bed. So of course she was running high all night, but it was fine. She had a good time and she was alive, and that was what mattered.
And I think this is a really good time to talk about expectations, right? And what are your goals for your child with diabetes going to a regular camp? And I'll kind of take an opportunity to speak on that. If your goal is going to be that your child stay in a very tight range, you're going to set yourself up for disappointment most of the time. Now, some kids are rock stars, and for whatever reason, they're able to do this. Some camps are going to help you with that. But I always tell parents, camp is not the time to worry about that incredible A1C that you're going to run and post on social media, which you shouldn't be doing anyway. Camp is the time for your child to learn about themselves, to stretch the limits, to push, to make mistakes, to figure out who they are when they're not at home. And the flip side of that is for you to figure out who the heck you are without your kids around. It is a gift, and a full month. And I'm not an endocrinologist, so ask your doctor. A full month at a slightly higher time in range, right? Or slightly lower time in range, a slightly higher blood sugar average, balanced with the incredible life experience that your kid is going to get, is worth it. It's not, we're not talking about kids running at 300 for a month. If that's happening, you need to adjust things. You need to, and I'll talk about checking in and things like that. But I know I'm on a bit of a soapbox here, but I really believe that giving Benny the opportunity to make mistakes and to learn at camp. And, when I'll be very open, because I know people tiptoe around this. His A1Cs throughout his whole life have been fine. Sometimes they've been great. They've been amazing. Sometimes they've been meh. But at camp, his average blood sugar was usually, and this is over 7 or 8 years, anywhere between like 150 and 200. Sometimes, I think one year he came home and it was like 220. And that's when we realized we also need to make some changes. The hormones were insane and we need to pour like gallons of insulin on him. Some of you heard that and are calling Child Protective Services, right? You think I'm the worst. I am the world's worst diabetes mom. Some of you heard that and say, oh my God, that's doable. I can live with that. You've got to figure this out, because if you think you're going to send your child to diabetes camp and they're going to be 83 the whole time they're there, you are in for disappointment. All right, I'll get off the soapbox. April, I saw you nodding. I'm not a terrible parent, right?
Absolutely not. My kids aren't quite old enough to send to camp yet. They're only 2 and 5.
Oh gosh.
So I'm not quite to the send to camp age yet, but they have spent nights away at grandma and grandpa's house before. So even though they don't have diabetes, the worry still creeps in, and making sure there's instructions or times was really important to me for my first kid, and now with the second, I'm like, whatever, just have fun. Like, hopefully they get a nap in there at some point, So, I imagine with diabetes, it's similar, maybe amped up a little bit just because there are, real consequences eventually for numbers. But, I think that's important to realize and kind of pull back that, when you're looking at how much a kid can gain from a camp experience, you can't put a number, even a blood sugar number on that. So as long as they're safe and healthy, I think it's an absolutely necessary experience.
Wow. How about you, Shelby?
Well, I was going to talk to the fact that at diabetes camp, which she also went to that same summer, that first year she went to non-diabetes camp, she probably her blood sugar was probably a lot higher at diabetes camp because they're more, I guess, more cautious about them being too low.
Yeah.
So she told me they would check her blood sugar and say, "Oh, you're at 150. Here, have a snack."
Same.
Yeah.
And we joke about that now. Like, she'll say, "Oh, I'm at 150. I should have a snack." But I can't remember the question. What am I?
Oh, that's okay. And I think that's a good, just quickly, I think this is really good to talk about context, right? Because 150 at diabetes camp, have a snack, makes sense. There are dozens of kids there. They are doing lots of activities. They are trying to keep everybody safe. They probably, at the time, and I know every camp is kind of trying to keep up here, nobody's monitoring everybody's CGM, right? So it's totally different setup. But when you're at home, 150 have a snack is funny because she doesn't need it. Right. The question was the balance of running a little higher and being okay with that at camp.
Oh, absolutely. I think camp is, I guess because I went to summer camp for a month every year when I was a kid, from the time I was 9 till I was 15.
Yeah.
And it shaped who I am today. I would not be the same person if I had not had overnight camp experience. And I see my kids' friends that don't go away to camp, and now they're 18 and they some of them struggle with going away to college. And I feel like if they'd gone to summer camp, they might be doing a little bit better. So I guess I'm a huge fan of sleepaway camp, no matter what. So
That's great.
think running a little bit higher to have that life experience is definitely worth it.
One thing I want to make sure to mention, I talked about this towards the beginning of our little roundtable here, and I wanted to circle back to it, was adjusting basal rates. Because when you're at diabetes camp, they'll send you home with the form of, we adjusted everything. Usually they knock the kid down 10 to 15% less basal because it's so active. But by the time diabetes camp week was over, Benny usually was getting 25% less insulin because they were so active, and it's really hilly and they do lots of swimming and there's hiking, all this stuff. So what we would do was use that as a baseline for, regular camp. I loved it because it was like a great test for that week, and then he'd go for the month. We found this regular camp to be even more intense than diabetes camp. So we were always adjusting. And one of the things we put in place at the second year and going forward was I would check in 3 days after he was there. They would call me if there was anything to deal with before that. They would call me 3 days in, and then every Sunday we would have a check-in. And usually the check-in was like, I need deodorant or stamps, or it was ridiculous. It was almost never about diabetes, but it was a good way for me to check in and say, do we need to adjust basals? Is everything going okay? How are supplies looking? That kind of stuff. So I know that Shelby, your daughter, was at camp a little bit less time, but did you talk to them about when to call you or checking in on anything like that?
The first year she went, we didn't have any scheduled check-ins. It was such a short period of time, but the nurse was really, really great and would text me and just say, everything's looking good. She changed her site today, and, just a brief, let mom know that things are okay. So we didn't really have the need to do any formal And there were no times that we really needed to make adjustments because the time there was so short.
Yeah. April, I want to ask you about that kind of as a counselor on the other end, because you would be the one getting the phone call. I'm not going to ask you, as you said, you've got to listen to what the parents want. So I'm not asking you to make a judgment call here. But what was helpful that some parents did that you would recommend? Was there anything that they did that you would say, yes, that's a good one?
I think preparing beforehand and being ready to talk to the counselor. I know every camp is a little different. How we did it at Space Camp was each team would have two counselors, so like a morning and an afternoon, evening. And having a face-to-face with the person who's going to be next to your kid for 8 or 9 hours a day or more, I think is really important. And, it also kind of calibrates the counselor with how serious this could be, things to watch out for because they may not be that familiar with it. When to call the nurse, because even that may be a little bit foreign if you're not familiar. Maybe specific signs your child has for going low or going high or times to check on them. I think that face-to-face time is really important if you're able to do it. So I know my parents did that with my counselor when I went to Space Camp. I remember them sitting down and talking to her face-to-face, and I did it with several of my campers as well. So I think it's really important.
It is. That's really good. One of the things that I also like to talk about is, there are very few non-negotiables for me when I send Benny to camp, or my daughter for that matter. But I do have one, and I shouldn't say it like that, but I do have one. And this is the kind of thing where I tell the camp up front, look, things are going to happen. Diabetes can be wonky. Usually Benny can troubleshoot. You don't have to call me. And like most camps, they're going to call you if a kid's running a fever or, anything happens, anything out of the ordinary. But my non-negotiable has always been if he throws up more than once in 24 hours, they must call me. Because more than lows overnight, which I know most people are terrified of, I'm not that worried about lows overnight. It's rare that those are actually emergencies. And Benny always sleeps at camp with a drink by his side or glucose tabs by his side, which I should have mentioned up front. This is I'm getting off topic here, but one of the best things we did for both my kids was we found these next to bunk shelves. They're like fabric shelves or, bunk bed shelves. There's all sorts of different kinds. And you bring them to camp and you shove them into the bed. And then they have a little shelf next to them. So when Benny goes on sleepovers, I don't even think he does anymore. He's 16 and it's a different world for him. But when he was younger, he always had a Gatorade next to him at sleepovers. So if he woke up and felt weird, our rule was drink the Gatorade, then check your blood sugar. And that's not how we do it at home. It's like the 150 have a snack. I would never say drink 25 carbs before you check your blood sugar. But at a sleepaway or at camp, just do it and check, and we can figure it out later. And he does the same thing at camp. But I worry about highs. I worried about dehydration. I worried about them not really knowing if he was high because nobody was following him on Dexcom. They looked at his blood sugar when he was younger. So I was terrified of DKA and things like that. Never happened, never got close, but that was my one non-negotiable. And that'll be my non-negotiable for this summer too. Do you all have anything like that? April, I'll start with you.
I don't know that my parents ever did just because I didn't physically have any symptoms like that outside of camp. And I think that really dictated what they discussed with the nurse and the counselors there. So I know that I did carry glucose tablets, those like really gross square ones that are in like those like packages. I don't even know if they have those anymore, but I remember sticking those in I even got special shorts for when I went to Space Camp that were like cargo shorts. So they had extra pockets for these.
Fancy.
Yeah, but I don't remember them saying any specific symptoms like that to the staff there.
And I should have asked you this earlier. Did anybody have to supervise you? I mean, at 12, you were probably independent enough. And I'm just curious, do you remember if anybody like watched you do injections or your meter over your shoulder or anything like that?
I always checked my blood sugar at the nurse's station. So the nurse or sick bay, the nurse always did, look at the number. I assume she, processed that and thought about the injection I was giving if it made sense. But no, I don't remember anyone supervising me really close.
Yeah. I think that's just kid age, appropriate, different stuff. I don't think anybody really watches Benny anymore, but when he was 8, I know they looked over his shoulder. They didn't know what they were looking for. I tried to give as much education as I could, but
yeah, that's a good distinction actually, because at space camp when I was a counselor, we had kids from age 7 all the way to 18. And you definitely treated each age group differently and looked for different things. And it was even a different sort of mindset for the counselors. If you were a counselor for the younger age group, you usually just worked with the younger age group. And it was a different set of counselors that worked with the older age group. So, yeah, you kind of just you train yourself on what 7 and 8-year-olds need from a counselor, which is more like a mothering thing than what 17 and 18-year-olds need.
yeah. I mean, at that age, you're still like, are you using soap in the shower? Like, there's all sorts of different age appropriate things that poor counselors have to do. Shelby, I skipped. Do you have a non-negotiable or anything like that?
It's funny because I got, I think, kind of a set of directions from you before I sent Caroline to camp that you gave me like a draft of what you had given to Benny.
Oh, yeah.
And so I can't remember if there was anything in there that was, about vomiting.
Yeah, there was.
Okay, so I must have had that in there, but I don't remember particularly going over that with the nurse or with the counselor, just because it's honestly, we've not ever had an issue. Vomiting has never caused any kind of a problem for us. So, and back then it was still new, so I really probably wasn't even on my radar. Yeah. No, there were no non-negotiables, but now thinking back, maybe there should have been.
I think it's all a question too of trusting the medical staff, and you had already had kids go through that. So, like I said, they're going to call. They called me, for my daughter hit her head on the side of the pool. They call you for he's got a rash. Generally they're going to call you for those things, and I got to knock wood or something. Benny's never had even large ketones, maybe once or twice in 14 years. He's never had vomiting associated with dehydration or things like that. Knock on wood, we've never had that problem. But for some reason, that stuck in my mind as something like, aha, this is going to be the thing that happens at camp. And, I'm kind of cavalier and I make jokes and I worry a lot, right? You can't help it. You still send them. And I think that's just a mom thing. I mean, April, your kids are too little for camp and they don't have diabetes, but you've got to worry a little when you send them even to grandma's house. That's just mom stuff.
Exactly. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. And mentioning the forms, Shelby, I forgot that I did that. I have these it's nothing that you can download. It's nothing formal. Shelby and I have known each other a long time, so I just sent her my stuff. But one thing that was very helpful, if your endo is on board with this, we typed up kind of an action plan. And I'll look at it and make a note at the end of this episode or in the show notes. It wasn't super detailed. It was kind of more if this, then that. Like Benny will do this and we hope you'll support with that, or like bringing the insets to the med table or going to sick bay to check your blood sugar. Those kinds of things are written out. And then we had our endo sign it. Now, my endo, God love him, will pretty much sign anything I give him at this point, right? I mean, it's been 14 years. He knows we're okay. I'm not going to give him anything crazy. He would tell me if he thought it was off base. But this was fantastic because the magic words are always my doctor says. And if the camp sees that the endo has signed off on this plan, not only are they going to probably follow it more closely, they're going to be much more reassured because a medical professional has looked at it. So I found that to be, I forgot all about that, Shelby. Thanks for bringing that up. I found that to be really good. And I did that. My kids went to day camp too. And Benny went to, regular day camp. And that was super helpful for them. And we're actually doing it for Israel, and my endo will sign off on it. So that's pretty good. Was there anything that you all, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think using your endo as a resource can be really helpful, because if it's a local camp, they may have other kids in the practice that are going or have gone and have tips for interacting with the staff there. the internet is also a great place to look up some Reddit forums on certain camps and see what's going on. And, there's other diabetes specific forums to ask questions about specific camps. And if you are able to talk to a parent that has sent a kid to a specific camp, I think that's worth a lot, actually, because you
Yeah.
get the inside scoop. So
Definitely. And it's funny with our camp, we had, there were 2 kids who were already at that camp during the current time with type 1, and one of them did not want anyone else to know. And I think that's a very tough way to go. We respected it. My daughter knew he was her age, the older group, and we respected it. And nobody, did anything, or it's all right. I told you dogs are going to come in. We little dog barking there. But I think that to me, I would be extremely uncomfortable sending my child to camp with him wanting to keep his diabetes a secret from as many people as possible, because you never know who is going to need to help. And another one of my, I wouldn't call it a non-negotiable, but I think a kid who's going to sleepaway camp who's got type 1 should know how to check his or her own blood sugar using a meter, because things happen even if you're Dexcom, all over 24/7. Got to know how to do your meter, got to know how to use your pump, got to know how to change your own insets, even if there's help there. And I think you have to be a kid who's going to raise your hand and ask for help. And that's something that you can teach, but you've also got to know your kid will do. And I see everybody nodding. Shelby, was that something that you knew your kid would do, or had you thought about that?
Well, Caroline's pretty responsible. I mean, I'm not going to say 100% compliant. She still forgets to bolus, and she's 11 now, and she's independent at school, and still she'll forget to bolus for lunch and, whatever. But I felt like she was responsible enough to do those things. She knew how to check her blood sugar. I taught her how to change her sites. She doesn't, probably her biggest issue is asking for help, because she does not want to seem different, and she doesn't want to call attention to herself. She's a shy kid. She does not like calling attention to herself about anything, including diabetes. But I think that if she really needed help, she would speak up.
Yeah, I think that's important. April, and is your dog done? It's
there's
okay.
some
Go ahead
lawn
anyway.
mowing going on.
Oh,
There's
yes.
a lawnmower. I don't have a kid with diabetes myself, so it's a little bit hard for me to say, but I think that would be something great to tell a counselor
Yeah.
when you meet with them, and just say, hey, like, they're not going to tell you when they need help. I know I actually experienced that myself. I remember actually the moment we pulled up to diabetes camp and got off the bus, and there was like everyone checked their blood sugar moment, and my blood sugar was in the 40s, just because I was like so overwhelmed about going to camp with all these diabetics that I'd never been around that many people with diabetes. And she was like, do you feel low? And I was like, yeah, I do. I was like, it was like almost this out of body experience. So camp itself can kind of maybe mask those symptoms or times when someone would feel comfortable speaking up. Just being overwhelmed at being at camp and being excited about it could change a little bit. So it's something good to bring up with the counselor, I think.
I do too. We also had the counselor kind of check on him every night, and it wasn't, Benny, is your diabetes okay? What's going on? Like, we talked about it so that he would just say, Benny, are you okay? Like, Benny, are you set? And what that meant was, is your pump charged? Does your pump have insulin in it? Is your blood sugar, like, are you feeling okay? Do you need me for anything? And so it didn't become this big conversation every night, but I still felt, and again, you guys know, I say all the time about Benny. He's a great kid and he's doing really well, but he forgets. He's a ding dong. He will wake up at 2 a.m. Oh, my pump's not charged, things like that. So to set him up for success, we really felt like having the counselors involved, but not overly, in his face about diabetes, was very helpful. I don't know what really went on. This is my fantasy of what I think happened at camp. I'm not sure, because they tell me these things happen, but Benny's going to turn 25 and write his own book, and it's going to be like, nothing happened the way you thought. I shouldn't say that. Like, that's terrible to put in people's minds. But I do have, I have my doubts that my perfect systems are executed perfectly. All right. Before I let you all go, is there anything you want to say? Any good stuff about camp? Anything we missed? And Shelby, I'll start with you.
You know, nothing earth-shattering, but after 2 years of regular camp and 2 years of diabetes camp, and then of course last year there were no camps. Before COVID, she had made the decision that she only wanted to go to diabetes camp. I think, we respected that, you know, and I asked her why, and she said, I just don't like being the only one there with diabetes. So, of course, this summer now, you know, everything's up in the air. The one camp that we are looking at is now going to a modified Sleepaway, maybe. I don't even know. So I think we're just going to skip camps altogether this year too, which is so unfortunate because she's getting to be the age where she won't want to go to camp when she's older anyway. But that's it. She prefers diabetes camp now because she's not singled out.
Cool. April, any last words?
I would just say one thing to watch out for is even if a camp generically allows or supports people with type 1 diabetes to come, there may be certain activities that are still restricted. I know at Space Camp, for instance, the older kids were allowed to go scuba diving in our underwater astronaut trainer, but that was not allowed if you had type 1 diabetes. So I guess, you know, think about kind of the activities that are going to happen at camp and if that's going to somehow negatively affect your T1D's sort of mental state on that, because I think it would have for me, you know, being that singled out, not just check your blood sugar, but you can't do this activity. So be sure to think about that. And then the other thing is just probably your kid's going to be fine. And if they run into any problems, it's probably not even diabetes related. It's like, you know, they have a problem with this friend or, you know, they're homesick or they're missing their dog or something. So keep that in mind that there's a lot more to kids than diabetes.
Wow. And, you know, that's such a great point about the scuba because there usually is an alternative for big time adventure stuff. There isn't always, so it's good to check. But I'll give another example. 2 years ago, gosh, I can't believe how much time has gone by. The big activity for Benny's age group at this camp included like this cave thing. And I don't know, it was cave swimming. I don't remember, but it was tiny spaces. And the way they described it, like I wanted to throw up just because forget diabetes. I was so claustrophobic thinking about it. But my daughter had done it because she went to this camp. And we talked about it and I was super uncomfortable. Like I let him do anything. But like, holy cow, if you get stuck in a cave, like, oh, it just type 1. And, you know, they didn't say anything to me. We didn't get that far where I even asked them. I asked Benny and he was like, Mom, no way. That just sounds like a hassle for everybody. And he just didn't like the idea of it. So we really dodged that bullet. But there was an alternative program for any kid who didn't want to do it because it really was kind of scary sounding. And so that was great. But if you were, you know, and the alternative program wasn't playing cards in the, you know, inside, it was doing another outside fun activity. But that's a great idea to check because there are going to sometimes be limitations, especially at camps that do not cater to people with type 1 who don't have all the facilities and all the knowledge. And we have to learn sometimes that there's going to have to be an alternative. There's going to have to be an adjustment that we and our children have to make. Does it stink? Yeah, but sometimes I think it's the price you pay for an overall wonderful life lesson and experience. All right. I felt like I was way too much on my soapbox this episode, but I hope everybody benefited from listening to some. I don't usually talk this much. Ladies, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate your time to share your experiences. It was so great. And Shelby, I hope camp, you know, I hope diabetes camp happens or different things, you know, go this summer. But keep us posted.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh. Thank you all.